I'm Bill Buell. I'm a reporter with the Daily Gazette in Schenectady, New York. We're here today at the Schenectady County Historical Society talking to Al Hart, a former sports writer at the Albany Times-Union and now an ordained minister with the Episcopal Church in Lake Luzerne. On Saturday, March 13th, the Hart family is taking us to the movies. There's going to be three viewings of old historical footage. Some of it taken by Al's dad, Larry Hart, some of it donated to him, and then it has been donated to the Historical Society. Al, tell us a little bit about what exactly is on the film.
Well, as you said, Bill, there's three separate movies about 20 minutes long each. One is completely about the trolleys, which I missed just barely in the 1940s. There's actual footage of like being on a trolley car going on its route, and there's some of where my dad obviously had jumped off and was taking movies of it going along. It's really interesting to see. I mean, it's a time that's gone by.
And what year would that have been, do we think?
41, I think, is where it ends. And there's actual footage of the last run. And my favorite part of it, you will see in the movie, is when the car has gone by and the men are taking down the lines that used to power the trolley, and in the background you can see different buildings of like the Lorraine block. You can see the Veterans Park, and that's very interesting. And then another movie shows just different scenes of Schenectady in the 1950s and 60s, and my favorite part of that, it shows the construction of 890, which just changed the whole way that we travel as the cars were becoming more popular, and it was a link to the Thruway, which was also fairly new, and the Northway. And different scenes of downtown Schenectady, new streets and old buildings as they come down.
These are in black and white and in color, right?
Yeah, there's a mixture. And there's a section with the Schenectady Little League team and their appearance on the Dave Garroway show in New York City.
And who is Dave Garroway? Remind our viewers.
Well, I believe he started out here in Schenectady, and
I think he did too.
He had the morning program, which is now still going on, the NBC morning program.
The Today Show, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they went down to visit him after they won the Little League World Series.
Right. Actually, Dave Garroway also came up here and took some footage for his show.
We also have footage of Charles Lindbergh landing at the Schenectady County Airport in 1927. And what does that show us?
Well, Lindbergh had just become the first pilot to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. And this was later that summer, and just treated as royalty. I mean, everybody was just, that had never been done before, and obviously. But
now that wasn't taken by your father, obviously.
No, my dad would have been, 1927, he would have been 7 years old, but he was there, and he talks about it, and he always admired pilots. And he wanted to be one in World War II, but he had a hearing problem, so he was a air reconnaissance photographer instead.
Well, we talked a little bit about your father. He was born in Schenectady?
Yes,
and
in Barrett Street in his living room.
He went to Mount Pleasant High School?
He did.
And then what happened after that?
Well, he spent a year at Union College, and then World War II broke out, and he went into the service with the Army Air Corps. And when he returned, rather than go back to college, he already had a child, and so he went right to work with the Union Star as a photographer or a reporter.
And he worked there for quite a while.
Till 1960. And then he went to what was then the Schenectady Gazette.
And did he see the handwriting on the wall as far as the Union Star was concerned? The paper lasted another 7 or 8 years, I think. Or did he just get a better offer he couldn't refuse?
I guess that there was a kind of a migration of workers that went from the Union Star to the Gazette. And in fact, one of them was your father, who I was fortunate to work with for 5 years.
Well, let's turn the subject to you. You grew up where?
Scotia. I lived most of my life, except for a year or two. And now I'm in Glenville. But it's hard to pull them apart now. They're connected.
And how did you get started down the road? You were a journalist, like I said.
Yeah, I mean, I had this boyhood, teenage idea to be a ball player, but that just didn't work out. So.
Like a lot of us did.
And then I was going to go to college to be a broadcaster, but Dad helped me get the part-time job at the Gazette that summer, and I liked it so much. Just constantly being around the news as it was happening, and I just fell in love with that, and so I decided to stay in Schenectady and go to college locally.
And you went to the University at Albany
Yes.
and got a degree in
English.
English. So you were a sports writer for 34 and a half years.
Yep.
And then what happened?
Well, my dad took ill, actually. He had Alzheimer's disease, and I could see my mother was having a problem taking care of him. And I said, Mom, you really need somebody to help you, and kind of scolding her, And as I was driving home that day, I said, yeah, stupid, she needs you. So, it was about time. So I said, well, I'll retire. And then I also went to the ministry at that time, which had always been kind of pulling at me anyway. So things kind of fell together.
Throw out the names of some of your father's books. He's done 5, 6, 7, 8. How many? And then what were some of your favorites?
Actually, it's 15.
Yeah, sorry, 15?
Oh, that's all right. Well, he began this in 1967. He wrote a book called The Sacandaga Story. And that's in its 12th printing now, I think it is. About the Sacandaga Valley and how it was flooded and is now the Great Sacandaga Lake. Then he wrote Did I Wake You Up, which is a marvelous piece of history in itself, because it talks about how famous personalities would come through Schenectady and they'd stop at the train station and stay at the Hotel Van Curler, or they'd just be there for a whistle stop. And Dad, being a photographer, they'd, hey, so-and-so's or Robert Young's here, or Joe Lewis is here. And so he'd go over and that's what that book is, Did I Wake You Up? Actually, is about Joe. The title comes from when Joe Lewis was here at Van Curler, and he went over early in the morning, and the sleepy voice says, "Hello." And he says, "I'm Larry Hart, and could I come and take your picture?" "I'm sorry, did I wake you up?" He said, "No, come on up." And so he took a picture of Mr. Lewis holding his head and lying in bed.
Yes.
Thank you.
And yourself, you have 4 or 5 books.
4.
4, okay. And tell us a little bit about them and how you got started.
Well, one is a biography of my father, which I actually wrote while he was still alive. And then I wrote Schenectady in the 1950s, just about the neighborhood and when I was growing up. And in each chapter I interview someone who also lived through that time, one of my peers or an older person. Schenectady in the 1950s is kind of a companion to that, because we used to call it going over town, walking across the Western Gateway Bridge. And anybody who lived in Scotia was connected to Schenectady and vice versa. And the last one that I wrote was Flashbacks a couple of years ago, which is sort of an autobiography of things that have happened in my life, and I'm kind of encouraging other people to look at their own lives in the same way.
One of the movies we're going to be watching on March 13th is the Dutch Reformed Church on fire in February 1948.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about how your father got there to take the pictures, first of all.
Yeah, well, back then, this wasn't uncommon, but a lot of people didn't drive, or they had one car. And I think the case then was that we didn't have a car yet. We lived on Sanders Avenue in Scotia, which was 2 blocks from Mohawk Avenue, and he would get a bus and go to work. And Schenectady being what it was then, it was a much smaller city. When you got up around, say, McClellan Street, you were in the country. And the same thing with other borders. So with his job as a photographer, he could walk all over Schenectady and take all the pictures he needed. And on that particular day, he got the call about the fire. I was 1.5, so I'm talking about, people told me this later. But he got the bus, and went over to witness this tragedy, this old church burning. And he had a still camera with him, and speed graphic that he used with the, the bulbs that were hot when they came out. And also a movie camera, but I guess for his own, I mean, he had a historical bent to him, and so he had that mostly for himself, I guess.
Well, he had more than just a historical bent. He was our city and county historian for quite a while, too. Do you remember when he kind of made that move into that realm? And who were some of his mentors, if he had a few?
Yeah, but by bent, I meant he had a knack of knowing when something important was happening. If he knew that, like, an important building was, on fire or in danger of being demolished, he was there to, like, he'd been, like, for example, the Silver Diner recently. I mean, he would have been there taking the pictures and movies of the demolition. But his interest in history is just inexhaustible. As far as mentors, I know you asked me that earlier on the aside. I know he had a high regard for Bill Effner. I don't know how much they intersected and how much they talked, but I know a lot of his collection was given to him or was donated to him.
And was there a certain time period in American history that your father really enjoyed more than others, you think?
Oh yeah, the Civil War. I mean, his library was gigantic, and he had whole shelves about the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln in particular. His interest in Abraham Lincoln just was a big part of his life. He even made, I think I mentioned to you, he had a collection of photographs that he made into slides, and then he narrated it made it all into like a life story. And I even remember him doing it here at the Historical Society because I was his helper that day. He had these slides, and they'd be on this opaque overhead projector while he was talking in the corner. This is before he put it on a tape recorder, reel to reel. So he'd kind of give me a wink, and I'd flip the picture, and Lincoln's birthday around that time. I'm going to guess 1967 because I think I was in college then. But he did that program here. And then he put it on a slide, with the revolving slides and a tape recorder. And he would take that all over Schenectady and Rotterdam and Scotia, and he'd go to, schools and clubs and church groups, and he would show that program. And I found that when we were emptying their house where Mom and Dad used to live, I found the collection and gave it to our local Channel 16, and they put it together, and in fact they just showed that again recently.
How many more books do you have left in you, and are you working on something now that you want to share with us, or? I
don't know, church keeps me pretty busy, Bill. But maybe, I've sort of a couple of ideas in mind, but nothing really concrete yet.
Okay. Al Hart, thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you.